Okay, now we're getting into the weeds. Before that, full disclaimer, this was supposed to be Heineken for the sake of symbolism, but the liquor store was closed today, so Begbie it is. Okay, so Jenna, she was my third, relationship, my love. I had about 5 years with her as well. But before I got to her, I actually did something after Jill and I broke up that I hadn't focused on when Chelsea and I had broken up, which was taking a little bit of time for myself. And now, even now, saying it that way, I don't know so much that I took it for myself intentionally. Maybe the universe was doing it and saying, slow down, we're not going to send anybody your way. That's not necessarily the case, because I did do a little bit of casual dating. There was one relationship that lasted for a few months, but it fleeting at the most, didn't leave the biggest impression on me, sort of thing. Nothing like that ever really did, because I always wanted to be in long-term committed relationships. At this point in my life, how old was I at this point? I don't know, early 20s, maybe coming up on mid 20s. And the ideas that had been fostering in my mind from when I was, a teenager, were now even stronger, right? I knew I wanted to find a girl, a woman. I wanted to fall in love. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have kids. I wanted to have a family of my own, because that's where I came from, right? So these were the ideas in my head that I knew that I wanted. So these fleeting relationships where my heart really wasn't in it, I wasn't into it, right? It just, they were not relationships. I don't regret them, but it almost in a weird way is a waste of time, right? It's well, what do we do? Yeah, we're having fun, so I guess that can be said for it, but those in between here and there, I was taking more time to focus on myself. Like I said, again, not consciously, but it was just sort of happening. I had moved back in with my parents after Jill and I broke up. So I was still quite young, obviously, figuring out what the hell am I going to do to make a living? What the hell am I going to do with my life? Mickey Mouse jobs here, there, and everywhere. And Jenna was actually a girl I was already familiar with. She was really good friends with both of my two guy friends that I had lived with previously with Jill. And they had a stronger friendship with her and her other friend than I ever did up until a certain point anyway. And then there was this one evening where I was at home, I don't know, probably playing video games. And was MSN still a thing? MSN Messenger? It may have been. It wasn't ICQ. We had moved on from that. At this point, it might have even been Facebook Messenger. Doesn't really matter. There was a form of communication, and Jenna actually reached out and started a conversation with me. And we had done this on the odd occasion, just sort of friendly banter here and there. Funny story, before she met my buddies and became friends with them, I had actually met her first. I had had a Mickey Mouse job when I was I still with Jill? Maybe. But I ended up working at a theater, which was the only time I ever worked at a theater, shockingly. And so did Jenna. So that's how we met each other. So we were familiar with each other, but then she moved over to working in a retail store in the mall across the street. And then that's how she ended up meeting one of my buddies who worked there. We were all back and forth with the Mickey Mouse jobs at that point. Right. But now flash forward to the night when Jenna reached out to me. She was a little bit more honed in on what she was doing for a living and whatnot. But, I think what kind of sparked her reaching out, and it's always sort of been a thing in the back of my mind, is that she was really good friends with my best friend, right? My best friend sort of crushed on her friend, but the friendship that Jenna and my friend had was a really good one. And he actually had left. He had to leave town for what he was focusing on work-wise. So he was gone, and he was going to be gone for 6 months. So in the back of my mind, I was always wondering, well, maybe Jenna in a way was missing him and thought, oh, hey, I'll reach out to Matt, and who knows, right? So it was a candid invite just to come up to her place. She was living in a basement suite. I believe her mom lived upstairs. So it's kind of like still living at home, but early 20s, figuring out what the hell you're going to do with your life. No big deal. Who am I to judge? I was at home with my parents, right? So, but anyways, I took advantage of that odd invite. And it was only odd because Jen and I never hung out. Truth be told, up until this point, I actually wasn't a big fan of hers. I thought there were issues, and not issues, but there were things that kind of happened in life and conversations I had with my friends, and I was just kind of like, nothing horrible, nothing, dastardly or anything like that, just enough to kind of rub me the wrong way. That's why I kind of like think back on it, and I'm like, that's why she really did come across as a wild card. I mean, I never thought about her that way then. It's only now when I'm trying to put into words and tell the story of that relationship that I'm like, yeah, she really was. Because if the last two girls were these, these very similar girls that you could glance at and easily confuse the two of them in terms of Jill and Chelsea being the redheads that they were, and very clearly a Matthew type, Jenna played against that completely. She was not that at all. She was a very short cropped hair sort of girl. She enjoyed tattoos, although when we first met, that wasn't really a thing. We'll get there. That'll become a... She was a smaller statue girl, kind of like a punk rocker might have been the best way to explain her. That's doing her a huge disservice, but it was kind of the vibe that I got from her. And in a weird way, it was appealing to me. Now, maybe looking back, it was appealing to me because I had just come out of two relationships that were very similar in the styles of the people I was with and my approach to those relationships, right? Now, I learned from my previous relationship that it's not healthy to, throw yourself wholeheartedly into a relationship and lose, your own personal identity and who you are as a person. And I think I did, for a while, I tried to lean into that and say, well, I've learned this, so I need to be a little bit more careful. And I think maybe by and large, my approach to the relationship was a little bit better in the sense that I knew what I wanted and I presented what I wanted. But anyway, excuse me. Yeah, this is a little different now. We adults. Went up there that night, met up with Jenna, and things just sort of kicked off. We found, I don't know if it was like a kindred spirit thing, or I think, if I'm really taking a guess, it was an opposites attract over common ground sort of situation. And we just sort of threw ourselves into that relationship. And it was fun. It was exciting at the beginning. Like, well, I mean, most relationships are. And that's not saying that, well, obviously we're not together, so it's not going to end well. Spoiler alert. Spoilers alert. Speak proper. Maybe have some more beer. Anyway. It was a lot. I remember it being a lot of fun. It was like electric at the beginning. And I don't know, maybe it was because there was like this weird line I thought I was crossing. I'm like, this is my friend's friend. It's kind of, not that it's off limits, but kind of has that edge of forbidden fruit, which is a weird way to say it. But it was fun. It was fun and exciting for both of us. And we were having a really good time. And once we started like officially like dating, all bets were off, and it was an amazing relationship at the start there. Like, we clicked on levels that I didn't even know I could click on levels with another human being. Granted, I was still, growing up and still sort of figuring out who I was, aside from knowing what I wanted out of my life in terms of what am I doing right now. There was a lot of, I can't even say misdirection in my life, but there was a lot of, no direction, right? I spoke about like having Mickey Mouse jobs and whatnot, and we're in my early 20s now. That was still what I was doing back then, right? I didn't go to any sort of post-secondary school after high school. I did take a screenwriting course, which was a lot of fun, but that was like totally separate and just a month or two once a week, it was a really fun course to take. But any sort of formal education after the fact, that wasn't my focus. It wasn't what interested me. So in that regard, then you don't have a choice. You got to do these Mickey Mouse jobs, right? And this is when I started working at, was it then? Oh, I still had a couple jobs, I think, before then, retail here and there. But ultimately, I ended up working at Shell, which is a gas station. I'm pretty sure everybody's pretty familiar with Shell petroleum fuel and whatnot. I've told a story before where when people would ask me, well, what do you do for a living? I would tell them I am a petroleum distribution engineer. Right. So yeah, I think maybe looking forward to like where I know this relationship is going and this story will inevitably end, may have played a little bit of a factor, but at the time it wasn't a point of contention that was um, considered or brought up or brought to my attention, sorry, that it was going to be an issue. I was in my own little world thinking everything was fine. I don't need to advance in that side of my life because I've got this new love of my life and we are together and Bob's your uncle, so to speak. I don't have to worry about anything. And at that point, I think that's when you kind of get a little bit lazy in relationships and you just think everything's sort of switched to automatic mode. It's another reason why I think hashtag bring back the manuals or hashtag save the manuals. Yes, applying transmissions to my relationships. No good. But yeah, at the beginning of that relationship, I mean, we were together for 5 years, Jenna and I, again, like that, roughly. I'd have to actually sit down and really hard think about the actual dates. But by and large, it was 5 years. That was my expiration date. Not that that ever became an issue for me in my head, thinking, oh God, we're in the 5th year. I'm doomed. That would come later. But not so much with Jenna. I was just focused on how much fun it was. And for a while, we just did our relationship the way it was set up. She was in that basement suite underneath her mom's house. She was still in the house. She wasn't under the house. That sounds bloody weird. And I was with my parents, and that was our relationship for a while. We would just go back and forth. We both had cars. We both had our independence in that way. And we would see each other as often as we could. I look back on those times and I'm like, but here's the thing. If it's not evident on my channel where I usually am in Calgary when I am van lifing around in those areas, I'm a South boy, Calgary South, right? And Jenna was living way up in the Northeast, like very close to where I had been living with my buddies and Jill. And that's a considerable drive, even on the main vein, which is known as Deerfoot Trail. It was a good clip to get there. But we did that. That's how we made things work. And making that little drive work is probably what made things later in the relationship work, well, to a certain extent anyway, or why there was a willingness to do it, because it became even crazier then. But as time went on, we still took those natural steps of evolving of our relationship, right? So we decided that we were going to move in together. And this was the first time I lived with the girl I was in a relationship with on our own. So very cool experience, right? And we got a nice little apartment out in the southwest of Calgary in a beautiful neighborhood out there. And it was this nice, just little 1-bedroom, gorgeous fireplace and all that. That's all irrelevant. But that was our little home that we made. And for those that have been around for a while, they know it was actually Jenna who I ended up getting Stella with. We picked her up as a brand new kitten down at Petland in Calgary there, one of the locations. And that was our little kitty that we had solo for a while until we had a few more sort of come into our lives. Well, I guess I still had Billy at that point, so I'm getting off track talking about my beautiful feline companions. But no, we made a nice little home in that apartment, and it was really fun to call it our own. And that's when I got to experience those things where, you know, it's kind of like the compromise when it comes to like little stuff, like how you're going to decorate the house, what's going to go where. And Jenna wasn't a very big, like, pusher in interior design or anything like that. I remember there was a couple Clint Eastwood posters on the wall and a huge like bookcase of DVDs. I don't know who those belong to. That's insane. But we started doing those coupley things like just as a couple. Before, in my previous relationships, it was always big groups of friends doing things together. But now here I was with Jenna, coming into adulthood with somebody I was in love with and looking forward to the future with. And we were going out and we were doing the shopping and we were buying furniture and making decisions like this and experiencing life. And, you know, I started experiencing a little bit more of just being with this girl and people that she's friends with and going to social gatherings, which give me nothing but anxiety, right? I make that sound worse than it is, but it's definitely not my favorite thing in the world. But these were all good things, and I was feeling really good about myself regarding all of that, right? It's of course going to go in a very off on a skewed tangent, I should say, of course. And it became one of the absolute hardest relationships for me to not only get over, but before I even got to that point, the amount of coping and putting my tail between my legs and not really standing up for myself, that became real bad. We're gonna save that for the next one because, oh boy, there's a lot to unpack. The last two stories that I've told regarding my heartbreak have all been in a sort of obvious chronological order. I get together with the girl, we have our relationship, we break up. And that's what I had learned. That's how a relationship goes. Unfortunately, with Jenna, when it came time for all of that stuff, it was not clean cut. It was not like a Band-Aid right off. And it was very much one of the absolute worst times of my life. Looking back, I definitely played a huge part in why I suffered so greatly on an emotional level, and I would even say on a certain mental level. But we will save that for another time. I'm going to leave this one here and just say thank you very much for watching. And until the next one, just go out there, be happy, be creative, be yourself. Most importantly, be positive. Only dead fish go with the flow. And now as I'm saying this, I realize I don't usually end these videos like that. But hey, this was a relationship that was different than anything else. So why shouldn't the videos also be different? In case that wasn't obvious.